Welcome to my cellar. One more time, my cellar's been getting cold lately because it's hot outside. I have to wear a sweater down here. Just keep my teeth from chattering. All right, let's dive in. Gotta say, I was extra tickled seeing that Nigerian group sitting around playing a game of Twilight Imperium 4. I was just tickled to see the Nigerian group sitting all down and playing together games that I recognized or thought I did or whatever, which proves that, you know, the games can be a universal language. They may have to have, but, you know, hell, everything else is printed in 7 languages today. You know, you go to buy a power screwdriver and you got a booklet that's unfolds to this long because it's got all the directions and all the warranties in 8 different languages. I really hope that we can help them hit their goal. I like to help out gamers, period. And the chance to help some gamers in Nigeria, I find pretty exciting. Okay, thanks for answering my question about the Joe Fisher articles, Tim. Going for a seamless transition between the 2 publications does make sense. For me, I had access to a pretty complete collection of Dragon magazines from early on, but only got to read the strategic review stuff years after they were published. I'll echo what you said. Mr. Fisher, if you heard this episode and remember it differently, please do share recollections. And if you happen to have a manuscript for Part 4, please share that too. The comment about the Civil War era D&D campaign and your response made me think of another question. Several episodes back, you mentioned the Avalon Hills D-Day. Let's see. And that Avalon Hill D-Day was the first war game you played. Yeah, 6th grade, or 5th grade. 5th or 6th grade. I recall from Strategic Review number 5 that you and a Navy buddy pooled your money to buy 1914. Great game. Well, let me pause here and say, you must have the same soft spot in your head that I do. Because while I do agree that it is an outstanding simulation in that the tediousness of marking, you know, absorbing those casualties, you got to want to play that game. Let's face it, because my God, you got to spend a couple 3 hours after you know the game well. It still takes you a couple 3 hours to do your deployments, at least 2. At least I found that to be the case. Anyway. Are there any other war games that you play that directly influenced what you put into my D&D games? No, not really. There were no war games at the time that were anything but military history type war games. It was mostly simulations in that everything was quantified. Things were broken down upon a scale by the designers so that they bound stuff against each other right. And more often than not, if you followed what happened in the battle historically, it happened that way again on the table. But then they added dice. And dice changed that. Okay, while dice was good, while dice were, we're talking a 6-sider here. While it was good for a combat results table in the simpler games, it also began to have many other uses besides just what happened in your combat. And the dice could make something oddly, something really bizarre happen. 1-to-1 on Tobruk is an old joke about the old Africa Corps game that you played all those turns to get down to the end and go on Tobruk 1-to-1. That was 1-to-1 referred to the combat results table. You rolled a dice and everything you'd been doing for several hours came down to 1-to-1 on Tobruk. The thing was, though, in other historical games, you could get an ahistorical result if the dice ran particularly your way or against you particularly. That's what made you want to play it again. Oh man, I almost wanted that. Next time I will. Or, okay, let's switch. You take the other side. Because of that element of chance. It wasn't a simple step-by-step recreation or reenactment. It was a game, simulation game. Pardon me. As such, there wasn't a lot to put into my D&D games because I wasn't playing anything fantasy at all. There wasn't anything fantasy then. It all came out in a span of about 3 or 4 years. That fantasy, well, S&T, SPI tried their hand, and they did a horrible Lord of the Rings game. And then Avalon Hill came out with a truly dreadful fantasy game. And, of course, the only reason they were doing it is because TSR had opened the field of fantasy, and they wanted to suck up a little the slop at that trough, too. So I didn't have a lot. Most of what I got, most of the influences that I had in designing and running my first games were from books, fantasy books, most of which were on Appendix N. Side note, Plague 1914 turned me into a pacifist. Odd, I know, but here I am in the middle of the Vietnam War. And that and the fact that I realized they weren't letting us win turned me into a pacifist. It's like, then, well, screw this, why are we here if we're not trying to win? And the losses kept adding up. Okay. For me, this same person going on, they have a game that played directly into their D&D called The Creature That Ate Sheboygan. Well, okay. And that's a war game in the slimmest of definitions. It's a game, and it's science fiction fantasy. But I take your point that they did an interesting marriage of the two. I'll take your point's well made there. Okay, this is a follow-up to a previous question about Psionic Blast. When conducting psionic versus psionic combat, does either side know which attack form is coming so they can better use defenses, or just a guessing game from round to round? I don't know that they know what's going to come. They might have an idea. This individual might have lore surrounding their history that might lead. I mean, it's like being a goalie in a soccer match. You know the tendency of a given player that's getting ready to strike a PK at you. But they can always shift. They can always change. And they know your tendencies. And so you can change. So there is some uncertainty, actually. As to what's coming next, no. I don't think so. Perhaps, and this is a real life thing. They might have an intuition as to how. But keep in mind that this is generally going to consist of a player versus an NPC run by the DM. So that can have many, many different types of influences. DMs tend to have a style that they like to play in, but every once in a while, a good DM will do it differently just to throw a monkey wrench in and make them rethink their plans, get out of ruts. Oddly enough, there's another comment about the Sonic Blast later on, so we'll go back to that in a little while. Absolutely, there are other folks WotC should have reached out to from TSR's days for their 90th history stuff. But they are committed to creating disingenuous narratives because they think it's the right marketing decision. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, disingenuous. That's good, diplomatic, tactful word. They just want to shove bullshit up your ass, make you think it's snow. In Gary's defense on gender-based stat caps, as a kid growing up playing D&D, I learned to understand that there is a tug and pull between simulation of real life using game rules and our fantastical imaginations in RPG. Maybe it's because I had an opportunity to see games develop. As I have played the game with and without gender-based caps or modifiers, I can honestly say it's never crushed my fun one way or the other. But one is more realistic than the other. Thus, the issue is realism. How much realism do you want in the abstract rules, and what can your players psychologically handle? Do they see such things as challenges or limitations meant to help define a character or unfair biases? Some folks enjoy playing weaker PCs and see it as an opportunity to roleplay and really present them with a new challenge to keep the game exciting, while others hate it and see it as a disadvantage, thwarting either attempts to max their character for the win, messing with their fantasy, or systematic oppression of the patriarchy against women. Whew. All I can say is don't read Notes on Women in Magic in Dragon Magazine number 3 if you don't like gender disadvantages and advantages for female PCs. Many folks early on were grappling with how to present gender differences or simulate gender-based fantasy tropes and abilities for PCs or NPCs early on. Genre exploration of the pulp fiction, myths, legends, cinema, literature, folklore concerning feeble characters, historical cultural norms, and biological realities all contributed to not just Gary, but others experimenting with modifiers, caps, and other rules. And there were various philosophical bents on the differences between men and women. And I'm not going into women's lib yet or anything with gender rights. There was a lot of explanation. I think, quite frankly, a lot of the questions were raised by these bogus women athletes that Russia kept sending to the Olympics. Of course, they were doping them and everything else. But I think that started to pop a little of the conversation about it. And, of course, a regular woman can't weight lift what a man can. And we'll talk about that a little more, too. So several of these are kind of all tied together over the course. Alright, this past Saturday in my first edition game, a player with Psionic Wild Talent, Psionic Blast group of skeletons. We resolved this using the chart, but afterwards came to the conclusion that undead were immune to Psionic Blast. Just wanted to get your input if you intended the original Psionic Blast to affect undead or non-intelligent creatures. Undead, no. They don't have a brain. They don't have a neural system. Literally neurochemistry, electricity to disrupt. They're animated by magic. On a non-intelligent creature, I would not have a problem with stunning the watchdogs, calming the horses so you can get to them, to steal them or something of that nature on a dumb animal. But I would say no. Undead. They have no mind. They have no neural network to disrupt. The best GMs are. Let me say that one over again. The best GMs are a little twisted, just a little. No, I have to disagree. The best ones are more than a little twisted. But yeah, the sentiment's valid. All right. Do you have any gaming regrets? Is there anything in your experience you recommend we do or avoid as gamers, or avoid doing as gamers? Well, first off, play every kind of game you can. Every time you're offered a chance to play, if you're a board gamer and a role player and you get a chance to play minis, do it. For one thing, it'll help you in your spatial. It'll help your spatial recognition, or whatever that skill or ability is called. I'm not sure. Ooh, geez, that eye is red. It's like somebody socked me. Nobody did. And don't don't limit yourself to one genre. If you're a fantasy gamer primarily, that's all right. Play some board games. You don't have to play battle reenactments. You can play some of the abstracts, such as Ticket to Ride is a good abstract. Power Grid's a good abstract. Feudality, because it's more of a strange game than it is a word game, but it's one of the ones I love. Don't play anything you don't want to play. Don't play something a second time that you didn't enjoy the first time unless you're going to see why you didn't enjoy it. Don't let yourself be conned into it. If you don't want to play it, don't play it. Easy peasy. Okay, here we go again. Gygax sexist? Might have been at one time, but Watsy published a book that flat out called him a misogynist in the preface. I certainly doubt that Gary hated women. Well, so do I. So do I. Gary was really old school, European old school. How he was raised. He had some outmoded and outdated ideas and biases and prejudices that were bred into him. I think he overcame some of them. But he was certainly a sexist. I doubt, and when I say sexist, it's not even a capital S sexist. It's a small case. He was certainly, it's nowhere near the worst in that regard during that period of time. Nowhere near. And what he did, the article in number 3, for instance, that he and Brian came up with, and that was mostly Brian, as I recall, only followed what was a commonly held belief with, valid data to support it. So he was parroting the learning of the time. And a lot of the learning of the time was sexist. Let's see. All right. Now, I don't know how this came up, but I imagine it's the section. With the proof that transition males into female sports dominate due to being physically superior does add credence to his assumption. His views were shared by much of the populace at the time. Okay, now we're going to go, now we got a comment against comment. Everything I've looked into says that transition male to female athletes do not proportionally dominate in any sports. Well, now, and they go on to say it's talking point perpetrated because they assume it would be the case. I don't know what numbers you looked into. I'm not so much talking about numbers. There are so few transitioned athletes. However, you cannot argue that the difference in muscle tissues, long tissues, short tissues, all that musculature is vastly different between males and females. Muscle tissue recovers at different rates. There are physical differences. Is what it is. Now, do top female athletes able to beat the pants off of almost all men? Yes. But can they beat the pants off the top male athletes? No. More of that's coming later, but it really struck a nerve this week. How do I feel about regenerating monsters, ones the PC thinks that they have dispatched, but a few dungeon corners later, the big distinctive orc that just splattered is back again, looking tougher but ready for more? What sort of justification would you come up with for such a phenomenon, or does a gimmick really need justifying at all? And then there's a question of whether the downsides to leaving weird phenomena unexplained. Well, okay, in answer, I probably wouldn't do it. Now, if the big bad evil guy had regenerative powers that he could confer upon his minions, well then I can justify doing that. But, even trolls can be destroyed by burning. So the players would have the same, I'd certainly let them use the same remedies to try to get around that particular skill or ability. I wouldn't use it, just use it. Certainly there's always circumstances that might arise to something like that. But again, under the previously explained possible scenario, sure. What are the downsides to leaving weird phenomena unexplained? Well, some would consider it a downside. Myself, I think it's tremendously hilarious when a party veers off and spends an inordinate amount of time discussing something you just threw in for color. What do we find? Well, it was an old storeroom, and then there's barrels and napkins rotted, and barrels that are empty, and there's plates and mugs and glasses. Oh, what kind of mugs? What kind of glasses? And all you're doing is throwing in something that would logically sit in a storeroom, and for whatever reason they fix on there must be some magic goblets here. If I was getting paid by the hour, I would sit and let them just go on and on and on and on about it, because it's nothing. That's a major downside. Major downside. Either they begin to feel it's unfair that this certain thing or circumstance keeps popping up and bashing them, or they go off on a wild goose chase over something that you only threw in as another noun in your explanation of what was in the room. Major downside. Could be a real buzzkill and a time sink. I would not say that WotC is safe corporate content. They have gone fairly far to one ideological stance, and it is offensive to a large amount of their user base when they hear about what they have done or how they advertise and make certain statements of ideology. When I went back into D&D, I dropped $5,000, miniatures, books, multiples for different VTTSs. I'm not even sure what that means. paints, etc. Yeah, you could easily drop that kind of cash. And once 2020 hit and D&D put their ideology public and showed their nasty taint, not a cent. WotC isn't about money, they're about pushing their values on you whether you want it or not. Majority of players do not want any of it. Ultimately, the more WotC pushes their values, the more players go elsewhere and they lose money to push. Eventually, there'll be no more money or influence, and the maggots will leave the corpse. Maybe then something good can grow out of it. I don't know what, a sunflower out of the maggot. I don't know that they're trying to push their ideology as much as they are trying to mirror what they think the ideology is or ought to be. Okay, that's my take on it. They're not pushing a doctrine. They're trying to test the wind, and I have no idea where it's coming from at any given time. That's my take. Okay, and here we go. Back to the women and men being as strong and what have you. As to women being as strong as men, please look at Olympic weightlifting records by sex for an objective measure. I know that's what Gary and Brian got into, part of. It was probably in the Guinness Book. Anyone who states women are equal to men in upper body strength is making a political statement. They're not making an objective statement. I've seen these people look me square in the eye, say they were denied food, and that's why they aren't equal to male in upper body strength, just shaking my head. And they're sickheads. They believe the father would deny his daughter food. It's a strength, like they did in 1E, and some... All right, it's a fantasy game. Sorry, my bad reading. Sorry. It's getting late. It's a fantasy game, and if they wanted to, they could have given men a bonus on strength like they did in 1E, and some racial limitations, which was fine. They could have also given female characters higher dex or constitution to compensate, but they didn't. Just say real world tended to agree with 1E on stats, and Gary did do a bit of simulation, at least in some of his content. Yeah, he did. And that's as good an argument as any. And again, here we go back into the physical composition of muscles. They're different. Which is probably why no matter how big and muscular and androgynous looking some of those female weightlifters come up and clean and jerk and that, they cannot do the same numbers as some of those androgynous looking males. Now I want to address a couple of comments that were made in result about it's not the designer's game after they release it, is one gist of a couple of the comments. Well, yeah, it is still. We fought against going places where we knew, because we designed the damn thing, the game would break. Without the strict limitations on magic users, both at the beginning and with how they can access spells and whatever, without those, magic users will dominate any campaign within 6 months. It'll be nothing but a world full of magic users. Because there is no counter except saving throw to count. It's an ability that can't be countered. Let's take poker. Poker's a game most people understand. They show it on TV all the time, though that's only one version. Many great movies have featured poker games. Poker. There's many ways to play poker. There's 5-card stud. There's 7-card stud. There's draw. I'll take 3. Then, there's what happens when you get crazy. Wild card games. No longer poker. A card game, but no longer poker. One-eyed jacks, deuces, whatever, you change the fundamentals of the game of poker. Poker's based on 52-card deck, 13 cards in a suit, 4 suits. That's where all the odds computations come from. Throw in wild cards, and it's gone. Now, if you like playing poker with wild cards, go for it. Fine. Fine. Not how I care to play. There are some interesting games that acquire wild cards, but I would never play them for money because you can't compute the odds well enough. Well, keeping the rules a certain way is the same as computing the odds in that, okay, this is how this works, this is how that works, this is how this works. What are my chances of being able to do thus and such? Then there's Hold'em. Can't miss that. My favorite game. The purest form, 5-card draw, or 5-card stud rather, is the purest form of poker, because that's all guts and glory. Draw is probably the next. Nowadays, it's Hold'em. The same rules apply. A pair is still beaten by 2 pair. A bigger pair beats a smaller pair. 3 of a kind beats 2 pair. Okay, I mean, the rules stay the same. It's how you get there that changes. It's my opinion that a lot of what's going on today is making D&D into a wild card game. Hold'em, on the other hand, we can all rely on those 5 cards on the table to make our hand. Well, those 5 cards on the table are the basic tenets of the game. Anyway, that's where it is. We finally have a book. We finally have a book. The book, The Lost Adventures, has been bound. They're going out. You'll be seeing this on Saturday. Some of them will already be in the mail to the Kickstarter people. We have outlined to you the months of horrible shit we have gone through trying to get this game out. Our hassles with Justin, his sabotaging our work, a tornado hitting a warehouse full of our printing stock. Snake bit would be a good word. But they're done. They're out. Yay! We're delighted. And you'll be seeing them very soon. Now, if you've got a couple of bucks to spare, send them to Nigeria. It'd be cool if we could kick them over the edge, a little help from their American gamer friends. And maybe a bunch of us all get together on Zoom one day or Discord, and we'll play Ohio versus Nigeria. Or wherever you are. I don't have anything else to talk about tonight, so on that note, encouraging note, Dodata Govi. Hello, and welcome to my Cellar.
The Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's a curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.